Welcome back to Kvetch Release. I am your host, Jon Liedtke. Sometimes on this show, we deconstruct the pressure cooker of regional politics or track the latest shifts in the North American industrial heartland that is my home here in Windsor, Ontario. But today we are looking at a line on a chart that has the entire global market holding its breath. Or does it? Earlier this week, JP Morgan published a projection of global oil inventories that looks less like a market forecast and more like a countdown clock. With the conflict in Iran continuing to choke supply, the data suggests that we could be months away from hitting an operational floor, a 6.8 billion barrel red line, where the physical infrastructure of the global energy system doesn't just get expensive, it potentially breaks. Joining me today to inject some much needed analytical rigor into this apocalyptic narrative is someone who has spent his career arguing that our energy conversation is often stuck in the pipes in the wrong century. Markham Hislop is the founder and publisher of Energy Media. He is a veteran journalist, host of the Energy Talks podcast, and perhaps Canada's most prominent voice on the S-curve of energy transition. Markham recently took a blowtorch to the fatalism surrounding this chart, calling it a fusion of prophetic certainty and technical jargon. Let's dive in right now with Markham to break it down. Markham, are things as doom and gloom? And hello to you as well.
Well, hello to you, John. It's been a while, and it's always good to see you. Well, who knows? I mean, things are in the Middle East are so chaotic right now that guessing what's going to happen tomorrow or next week may as well play the lottery. So the scenario that we're talking about here is one that's making the rounds on social media. You saw it on X, where it's a number of analysts who are doing this, and they project out into the future the absolute worst case scenario. It's like this apocalyptic, the pipes run dry, the pumps run dry. There's no gas. There's nothing, not on nowhere, and the whole industrial machine comes crumbling down around us, and civilization then follows, down down the toilet. And we're all, a year from now, we're wearing animal skins and huddled around the fire.
Mad
The
Max.
prob Yeah, well, that's X, right? But I'm seeing it on LinkedIn and I'm seeing it on other places. I haven't seen much of it in the mainstream media, which, probably tells you a lot. But the point here, I think, is that humans are amazingly adaptable. And the systems that they build are, for the most part, pretty adaptable. And it would have to get really, really bad for that apocalyptic narrative to come true. And if you think about the the Strait of Hormuz, 20% of LNG, 20% of oil, and then I forget the percentage of the world's fertilizer that goes through there and other products. But even if you took that out, you'd still have 80 to 85 million or maybe 90 million barrels of oil. And you'd still have a lot of natural gas, and LNG would, get to market, that 80% of the LNG would get to market elsewhere. So can we run civilization the way we have it now on 80%? Not at these prices. But I would bet that if people really had to roll up their sleeves and sacrifice and ration, and like India's already, Prime Minister Modi is saying, don't go to work, don't drive to work, conserve gas, that sort of thing. And if we had more of that, we would get through it. But I think we're in for some unpleasantness, to be honest. If it doesn't turn out to be apocalyptic.
That was going to be my question, is where does the human response step in? But you got ahead of me right there. So thank you with that one. The next question, though, is, analysts say the system breaks at this operational floor. For those who are outside of your sphere, and from me having to learn a little bit more about this sphere as well, that's when the physical flow stops because the inputs aren't there to keep the other gears going, if you will, to dumb it down. You've argued that modern systems are very adaptive, of course. Is there a historical precedent for an energy system bending rather than breaking under this kind of extreme stress that you've seen before?
Boy, that's a really good question. And the analogy for me would be 1973 and 1979. The two big oil shocks from the 70s. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, not in 1973. I was a little young to be driving down to the gas pump, but in 79, I certainly had a car, and I remember what it was like. And yeah, it was really tough. On the other, but I think they lasted maybe 6 weeks, if I remember correctly. We're going back a while, John. So, but my point here is, yes, it was difficult. Yes, there was some pain. Did we adapt? Yeah, we walked instead of drove, or rode a bike, or we whatever. And the I'm suspect that that is probably not perfectly analogous because today's systems are much more complex and they're bigger and they require a lot more energy. And so those of us, those countries that are still reliant primarily on fossil fuels, mostly oil and gas, we're going to be in trouble. Now, here's the thing. Here's what uh, one of that isn't, I think, well, it gets ignored by these kinds of arguments, is that Asia is the one that is the region that's hurt most by the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. It's also the region that is the furthest down the road to electrification. Like China gets 30% of its total energy from electricity, whereas Canada only gets 20%. And that's increasing all the time. So if you're China or you're India or you're Pakistan or you're Thailand or whatever, you actually have options. You don't have to have a car to get to or at least a combustion car. Maybe you buy an electric vehicle or you buy an electric motorcycle or um, what do they call those in the Philippines? Tic-tics? I can't remember. I remember riding in one when I was there 30 years ago.
I know what you
But
mean.
yeah, but I mean there are alternatives to combustion technologies that weren't there 50 years ago in the 70s. I mean, if you didn't have a gasoline, well, no gasoline or diesel in the pumps, then you didn't drive your vehicle. Well, now you can see, people are going, oh, maybe it's time we took a hard look at an electric vehicle or at least a hybrid. So, and kind of the same thing on the gas side, a little tougher because you can't just say, oh yeah, you know what, we're going to toss out the gas furnace and bring in a heat pump. We went through that process about 3 years ago, and it does not happen overnight. And there's some changes that have to be made. But still, my point here is that we have the technology that is an alternative to oil and gas, to combustion technology. And we're already seeing countries like China speed up their transition. So my guess in this is that yes, it's going to hurt, and yes, we're also going to see people adapt by adopting new technologies.
You're always just one ahead of me right now, just scratching off questions that I want
As
to
per
get.
usual, John, as per
That's
usual.
great. I love it. It's okay though. I've got other ones. So this chart assumes that we must have this oil to survive. You obviously posit a different outlook. We're not suggesting to eliminate this oil specifically, but there are alternatives. Based on your work studying and analyzing renewables in your sector more broadly, how much of that missing 20% of global supply could realistically be offset by existing alternative capacity in a 4 month window?
Almost none of it. This is part of the
That's
problem
the
is
truth there.
whether, yeah, whether we're talking about oil and gas or we're talking about electrification, electric technologies, both the generation, wind, solar batteries, or on the demand side, electric vehicles and heat pumps would be the two big ones. They take time. They have to be manufactured. They have to be installed. I mean, you got to get the inventory, from usually from China. So yeah, we have a problem, and it plagues us in Canada because we're talking about building a pipeline to take Alberta crude oil over to China. Well, it takes us 5 years to build a pipeline. That's an optimistic schedule. So we have a short-term problem, short-term pain. I mean, and some severe pain coming, and all the solutions we have are medium to long term. And it doesn't matter whether you're building a new pipeline, to get a new supply of oil to someplace, or you're having to manufacture electric vehicles and solar panels. It's still the same problem. So we, I guess what I'm saying here is that yes, we'll adapt. Yes, we'll eventually recover, depending on how severe this all turns out to be. Um, but it's going to take time, and it's not going to be easy, I would guess.
Or as Donald Trump would say, short-term pain for long-term gain.
Well,
But
when
is the
you
there?
live in an apartment. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of Donald Trump in his New York apartment, but everything is gold,
Hmm.
everything is gilded.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine that if your toilet seat is gilded, that you probably have a little different perspective on what short-term pain for long-term gain actually means.
I'm writing a piece right now that's trying to compare Donald Trump to being the love child of Lucille Bluth. It's a banana, Michael. How much could it cost? $10? With Grandpa Simpson yelling at the clouds in the sky. Somewhere is what Donald Trump is. You mentioned that the fusion of prophetic certainty and technical jargon can be dangerous. I mean, I think you and I have spoken about that before on air as well. How should energy journalists specifically, I mean, like yourself, cover a chart that comes from a very reputable source like JP Morgan? You can't dispute the numbers here, but you don't want to fall into the trap, of course, of this apocalyptic doomerism determinism. This is not written in stone. These are not decomposed dinosaurs that we're using for fuel millennia from now.
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm not sure that I have an easy answer for you because we're kind of grappling with that ourselves here at Energy Media. And one of the points I think is well, we're pointing out that there are alternatives, and so what we're seeing, China exported 50% more EVs last month than it did the month before. So clearly, EVs. Not in China. Now, this is an interesting point. I was just reading, I think it was a Bloomberg story today, that the April numbers for China, EV sales in China fell by 17%.
Hmm.
Why would that be? That seems crazy. But bear in mind that China had been basically supporting much of the global oil market for the past year before the Iran conflict by building up its reserves. It was buying, cheaper oil and sort of stocking it away. Million, I don't forget. Nobody really knows how big China's strategic reserve, petroleum reserve is. Probably hundreds of millions of barrels. I have no idea. But anyway, quite a lot. And so it's almost like China had planned for this. They got together with Iran and said, if this happens, maybe we should, what do you think? So and by the way, China is a big customer of Iran, buys a lot of its oil. So this is part of the rejoinder to JP Morgan is, okay, but hang on a second. Where is their adaptability within the system? Well, okay, so the Americans have a strategic petroleum reserve. China's got one. Europe has got one. I think they're pretty sure they have. And there's, we've been releasing some, but still there is more. And Canada doesn't need one because we export way more than I think we consume. We produce a little over 5 million barrels and we consume about 1.5 million, and then the rest goes down mostly to the U.S., but increasingly we're sending some over to Asia. So there's kind of some cushion built into the system, as it were, so that we probably have more time than the J.P. Morgan you know the graph indicates. And how much of that do we have? Because we don't really know in the cases of countries like China. So that adds some uncertainty, but I think there's enough of that and enough adaptability within societies, whether it be, market societies or market economies, or whether it be more command state capitalism kind of economies, people will adapt. Now, if we had the exact same situation today, yeah, a year from now, and all of the cushion is driven out of the system, and people, there's a limit to how much you can adapt for how long. Is it theoretically possible? I suppose. I just think it's unlikely that it would be as bad as maybe that chart suggests.
Well, it's not a good chart, that is for sure, though. So you're following this sector, of course, the energy sector, very closely. It's your day job. How does a global inventory freefall affect your view on the long-term infrastructure projects like pipelines? Is the fear of a system break, does that make assets like these more valuable? Or does it prove that they're actually part of a fragile, outdated model? This is where I'm having a really hard time wrapping my head around. I don't know if we should be double downing on what worked before, but in a different capacity, or if we should be shedding it and jettisoning it and going, no, we got to be doubling down on the future. Or is it a mix of both? Is it a hybrid model, if you will?
I would argue for the hybrid model, and let me explain why. So there was just a story out, I think it was today. I was just on a radio interview talking about it, where the Alberta and Premier Danielle Smith, they've been negotiating with Prime Minister Mark Carney and the federal government over this memorandum of understanding they signed last November that included a pipeline in return for emissions reductions and some other things. And so the Smith was in the media saying, "Oh yeah, yeah, things are going really well. We think we're going to have an agreement in a couple of days." Now I pointed out to the host Mike Smith that Smith talks like that all the time, right? I mean that's just her. She's a very good communicator. She spent 9 years as a talk show host, so
Yeah.
she knows how to communicate. So I discount a lot of what she says, and experience, history shows that that's the proper way to approach her. But it's entirely possible that the federal government and the Alberta government come together on an agreement, but then they've got to go get the BC government and First Nations on board in some way. And that hard, really hard. And the only way that I can see is everybody's got to benefit. So if the prime minister came to Premier David Eby and said, "Hey, you know what? I think that we could build you a whole bunch more LNG plants on the West Coast," and that would be, like, I did the math one time, it's like $300 billion. By the time you build the pipelines and the plants and increase gas production in the northeast of BC, if you'd support this pipeline, we could probably do that. And then you go to the First Nations and you say, "Well, I understand your concerns, but how about if we let you own half the pipeline or a quarter of the pipeline or whatever it is?" So if everybody gets a pretty good taste out of all of this, I could see the parameters of a deal for a pipeline. But a private sector proponent still has to step up to build it and operate it. And you still have to have markets somewhere, like presumably in Asia, where the oil sands companies will step forward and say, "Okay, we're going to invest tens of billions of dollars in increasing our output in order to fill up that pipeline." And never mind the logic of it, what the numbers say or what's going on in Asia, but I've been talking to and interviewing some folks inside the industry, like Richard Masson, who's an energy economist, and he's very skeptical that the pipeline will ever be built. And one of the reasons is the oil sands industry really doesn't want to go out on a limb like that.
Hmm.
And because think of it, in order to fill up a 1 million barrel a day pipeline, you need 700,000 barrels a day of new bitumen, because it's so thick, it's like peanut butter, right? So it's not going to flow in a pipeline, and you dilute it with a light hydrocarbon, like something like gasoline, right? It just like whatever it is, a diluent, which means that 30% of your pipeline is filled with a product that has no value, that you're not selling to the refinery at the the end of the day. In fact, they turn around and they ship it back often to Canada. So it's a cost to you. So if you're going to increase the oil sands supply by 700,000 barrels a day, goodness gracious, that's a lot of money. And you probably have to do what's called greenfield, which is where you build new plant and infrastructure, and then your break-even costs are like $60-$70. And by the time you tack on the cost of the getting it over to your market, you're probably not competitive. So, everybody's talking a good game until they get the pencil out and start doing the math, and it's, well, you got to squint to make it work. So that's why there's not a stampede of industry support for this, is because there's a lot of moving parts that have to fall just right in order for the pipeline to get built and for the oil sands to expand and produce enough supply to fill that pipe. Now, John, there is I think, a better way to do this.
Let's hear it.
So the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline added another 590,000 barrels of capacity, and it's mostly dilbit. But by increasing the power of the pumps along the route of the pipeline and using friction reducing agents to make it slicker inside, less friction, they think that they can increase that capacity by another 300,000 barrels. So now you've got 890,000 barrels. And the government of Canada has already paid for this. We paid $35 billion, right? So this is a reason. The cost of optimizing that pipeline to get more is a lot less than building a new pipeline.
For sure.
So there's 300,000 barrels. Now there's another technology that was just getting off the ground under NDP Premier Rachel Notley in Alberta in 2018 called partial upgrading. And they had a program, and there was already a couple companies come forward. And then in 2019, Conservative Premier Jason Kenney had won the election, and he canceled it. But the idea behind partial upgrading is you take that peanut buttery bitumen, and instead of diluting it, you partially upgrade it. And you turn it into either a medium grade or a heavy grade that will flow in the pipeline. So not only do you add $10 or $15 to the value of your barrel, but now you don't need any diluent. So if you don't get the full 100% of the pipe, you get much more than 70%. But let's assume for sake of argument that it is 100%. So now, instead of getting 70% of 890,000, you get 100% of 800. And it really, you haven't gone out on the limb and spent $50 billion to get that capacity. So there's another, I don't know, I'm off the top of my head, maybe 300,000 barrels, 400,000 barrels. On top of that, Enbridge, which has the main line down to the US, has said that it wants to optimize its pipelines, which is over 2 million barrels a day currently, and add 400,000 barrels a day of capacity. So now you've got 700,000 or 800,000 barrels, which is essentially what you'd get if you built a new pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And the private sector has built it. Well, I guess Trans Mountain Expansion is actually a Crown corporation. But be that as it may, it's at a much lower cost than building a brand new pipeline. So my point here, John, is we can be clever and we can do more with what we have, and we can add that capacity incrementally and a lot quicker than building a new pipeline. Or we can just throw caution to the wind, and the taxpayer comes in and de-risks it and puts up tens of billions of dollars to so the private sector will go ahead and do it, which is why we always do things. So we can be clever, or we can just do what we always do. Now, which do you think would be the more prudent approach to this?
Yeah, well, what does my opinion have to do with any of this? But no, I hear you, and that's the frustrating thing. I got one last question for you. I know you've got to go to prep for that next segment you got coming up, but it would be remiss also if I didn't mention, I really, really do like the Tin Lizzie you got behind you there with Model T. That's gorgeous on the shelf.
Oh, well, let me tell you the story about that. So my grandfather was an interesting character. He grew up as a farm boy in Ontario, early 20th century. And when he was a teenager, he lost his leg, I think from about the knee down, and he lost it in a hay mowing accident. Yeah, back in the day when they had hay mowers. And so he still farmed as an adult, and he was a blacksmith, and he had an implement agency, which is a big deal back in the 20s and 30s. And so that little model is something that he would have got as a promotional toy to give away back in the day. So kind of like the McDonald's kids meals
Yep.
where we got a toy. So that's what they would give away. And when he died, I forget how many, maybe in the 70s. Anyway, it kicked around the family and I got it. And I think it's just the coolest darn thing. It's cast metal of some kind. And yeah, it's one of my most cherished possessions.
I've got my grandfather's. They're just about 5 feet out of my reach right now as well. But Henry Ford Wagon Works, that was about 10 blocks away from where I am right now, where those wheels were put on. And that's how they brought tariffs. Again, the only way that Henry Ford was able to bring the cars into the country was to assemble the cars in the country. So he created the Wagon Works in Canada, imported the full vehicle except for the wheels, put the wheels on in Canada. Welcome to the Commonwealth. Okay, last question for you. And this is the killer one for you, okay? If the supply side is a line that's crashing towards zero right now, and the demand side is the story of rapid adaptation, where do these two meet? Is there a version of the next 6 months, Markham, where we experience potentially a deep recession, but the physical failure never materializes?
Boy, that's a tough one. And if I were an economist instead of a journalist, I might have a better answer for you. I would say, and this is just my guess based
Yeah, sure.
on, you know, talking to real experts, I would say probably no. And remember that a lot of what goes on the one hand, we're connected in this global economy in a way we've never have been before. The globalization of the world economy. On the other hand, the energy transition is very asymmetrical in that Europe was leading for a while, and then 10 years ago, 15 years ago, China caught up, and then China invested, I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars in developing EV industry and a battery industry and solar panel manufacturing and so on. So it has built up its manufacturing capacity for those clean energy technologies way beyond current demand. And I don't know if you remember a year and a half ago, there was a big debate going on about China's overcapacity, and
Mhm.
how they were dumping cheap, clean, like cheap solar panels on the market, and which is prohibited under the World Trade Organization
Yeah.
rules. So, China's perspective on that was, well, we don't have overcapacity. We just build in anticipation of demand, right? Because we're a state directed economy, and we'll subsidize it, and so we can get away with that. So now here is China, which last year built 34 million cars, which is like three times what the Americans built. They came in number two. So China's already gobbled up the global auto industry. It's so disrupted it. It's hard to believe. Uh, but they actually could build 50 million cars, most of whom which would be electric vehicles. And they have capacity to build, I think, like two or three times as many batteries and solar panels. So I don't know if they're going to do this. Well, it's just too early to tell. But if you're sitting there with all this, manufacturing capacity, and you've got a global, the mother of all energy shocks going on, and all this stuff is, energy related, you might want to increase manufacturing and just export like a son of a gun, and cash in if you can. So what does that do to, the two lines crossing? There's so many variables here that giving you even a best guess at that, well, my best guess is I haven't a clue. Uh, but I see that. But here's another thing: despite all the chaos, the basic fundamental trends in the global energy system have not changed. And that trend is that oil and gas is slowly sort of creaking to a halt. Demand growth is creaking to a halt. On the electric side, uh, the adoption of solar and wind and batteries is just running rampant in Asia and Europe, as is on the demand side, transportation. Those will, so my guess is that those trends will continue, but they'll accelerate. And the march to peak oil demand or peak gas demand that we thought was 2030 or 2035 is going to come quicker because this is something Canadians have not got their heads wrapped around. Energy security to you and I means being able to buy enough gasoline or diesel when we need it at a reasonable price. Energy security in China means I buy solar panels and we build a solar farm and I pay for it once and I never pay for it again for 30 years, maybe 50 years, who knows? And because it didn't have to be replaced every day. We don't have to import oil and LNG all the time. And so the idea of energy sovereignty is a new one. And do you have control over the energy that powers your economy? And increasingly, because we're exporters of oil and gas, we haven't even talked about the idea. But in Asia and Europe, that's a big debate that's going on. And that's something that your viewers should keep an eye on, is the energy sovereignty and the extent to which that idea catches on in markets where Canada wants to export, and that's primarily Europe and Asia.
Markham, thank you so much for the insight into all of this. I won't take up any much more of your time. I know you've got more interviews that you got to do today. It's a really complex topic that's outside of the wheel well of most people, but it affects absolutely everyone. And as much as Donald Trump likes to say everything's going fine, I don't care who you are, when you drive by the gas station and you see the price right now and you know that it's been going up and up and up, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be stopping anytime soon. That's why we go to the experts to have it broken down for us. Markham, you are that expert today, energy and climate journalist and commentator, CEO and publisher of Energy Media. Markham Hislop, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me, John. We always appreciate our conversations.